Salam, Namaste, Sanbonani, Molweni, Vanakkam, and welcome to this Sunday's edition of The People's Voice, brought to you by Shabnam, Palesa, Mohamed for Salaamedia, your humanitarian journalism platform and portal, where we don't just tell you what's happening in the world, we tell you what you can actually do about it. A critical show for us today with 4 brilliant guests. I want to make sure that we have as many people engaged in the show today as possible. You can tune into the show on Facebook Live via the Salaamedia page. Salaamedia also has a YouTube channel, so you can find the show there. You could listen live also via the Salaamedia website, the Salaamedia or TuneIn app, and all free-to-air decoders. A number of ways to watch the show and engage with us today. Before we begin with our guests, I'm going to start a watch party from the Salaamedia Facebook page. So you'll find Salaamedia on Facebook, and I'm going to locate the video and we're going to start a watch party. What that means is that people on my profile will be able to engage on the show today, and we've begun. The watch party is live. I'm going to ask our guests if they can possibly do the same thing. Then all of their people on their networks and profiles can join the show today. All right, we've got the watch party beginning, and that will be on my timeline. I'll be able to pick up comments from the Salaamedia page as well as from my watch party, and we love that. We love the engagement. We love the interactivity. Okay, what are we talking about today? Gender-based violence is, for me and for many women who have experienced gender-based violence, and our allies, and of course, children who've experienced child abuse, and adults who've grown up having experienced child abuse, a bigger virus than the world has ever faced in the history of humanity. Yet, regardless of that, the attention we give to this issue, the resources we put into fighting this pandemic are little to none compared to what we put into coronavirus and other issues experienced around the world. So what's going on? We're not going to talk statistics today. We're going to talk real life stories with survivors and activists, and that's how we're going to make a difference. So we've got 4 guests, and I'm going to ask Sadiq to bring them onto the show, and I see we've already got a number of guests that have joined the watch party and the live video. But let's bring on our guests, Dr. Tash Reddy, Rev June Dolley-Major, Anazia Govender, and Sheena Clair Jonker. Let me tell you about these absolutely brilliant powerhouse women. Dr. Tash Reddy is an activist, a humanitarian, an entrepreneur, and a gender-based violence survivor. Reverend June Major, and we're going to mute all of the mics, Sadiq, just so we don't get any feedback from everybody's background. Reverend June Dolley-Major is an ordained priest from the Anglican Church, and she's fighting for justice against gender-based violence for herself and for others. Anazia Govender is a mom, a singer, a comedian, an entrepreneur, and she recently came out on a Facebook video about childhood abuse that she has experienced. Sheena Clair Jonker is a lawyer, a teacher, a trainer, and the founder of Alternative Dispute Resolution Network South Africa and Access to Justice. My colleagues, my comrades, and fellow activists, welcome to the People's Voice.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so it's going to be a little tricky with the mute, but we're going to do a set of round-robin questions to get through some very important issues. But first of all, we need to understand your experience, as much of it as you're comfortable sharing with us. So let's start with the first question. Dr. Tash Reddy, can you share your experience of gender-based violence, the trauma it caused, and what's happened since? And of course, the first question is going to be for the next 10 minutes, and we'll ask the same question of Reverend June Dolley-Major, as well as Anazia Govender. Can you share your experience of gender-based violence, the trauma they caused, and what's happened since? Tash?
Well, I've been a victim of what you call is rape at a private hospital in KwaZulu-Natal, and since then I was a victim of a registered male nurse, a staff member from that hospital, and since then it's been 3 years. It happened 3 years ago, and I've had to take it to court. And he was found guilty subsequently, but he is being sentenced next week on the 27th of July. He was supposed to be sentenced on the 26th of June. The social worker and the parole officer suggested direct imprisonment, which his lawyer refused to accept because he was a first-time offender, and they thought the sentencing was too harsh. Um, since then, from the trauma it's caused me has been widespread. It was emotional, mental, physical, mostly psychological, because I always thought of myself as a very aware and learned person, and didn't expect to fall into becoming a victim so easily, which I did. So made me more aware of how vulnerable we can be, especially when we're going through. Um, I had uh, I was going through the very sensitive issue of abdominal cancer, and we had and I was in a very vulnerable mental state, and that is when I think attackers or know how, they kind of pick up on it, and they know that they can you are a prime victim, so to speak. So it's affected me in so many ways, in that I felt like I allowed myself to be a victim. I exposed myself, put myself in a position to be abused in that way, and I've been punishing myself ever since, in numerous ways. So I've also been a victim, I think, which you and I, you're going to touch on, of victim bashing and shaming, which I think it was worse. It was worse for me than actually the experience itself. The what I got back from the community. So I was made to feel like it was all my fault, and and then I sent you a, a an article last night where a 2-month-old baby was raped in a hospital as well on Friday, and the comments were the same that I got, that it was the baby's fault, and I just cannot understand our mentality. I cannot understand our community and where we're going in terms of protecting our victims. Yeah, so it's been a very difficult situation.
All right, Sadiq has unmuted the mic. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep all of our guests on mute. I will not be on mute, and the guests that I'm speaking with will not be on mute. So you can mute Tash for now, as well as Anazia. And we're going to move to Reverend June Dolley-Major. Reverend, can you please share with us your experience of gender-based violence, firstly, the trauma it's caused, secondly, and what's happened since? Reverend, can you hear us?
Yeah, lost you there for a second.
All right.
I've lost you there.
All right. There seems to be a bit of an echo on your side, Reverend, but just to repeat the question, can you share your experience of gender-based violence, firstly? Secondly, the trauma that's been caused to you. And thirdly, what's happened since?
Okay, so yeah, I'm an ordained priest in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. And 18 years back, I was raped by another priest. Because it's a mainline church, I was told to keep silent. And so you face the trauma of it all. And I broke the silence. First of all, you break the fear, because in breaking the fear, that's when you only break the silence, because you died because of fear. When I broke the silence and when I actually reported the rape, nothing came of it, because the perpetrator is still free. The police basically, the docket disappeared 3 times, got lost on 3 occasions. And then I was told that the Archbishop was well loved in Jamestown, because that's where it happened. And when the detective told me that, I knew nothing will come of it. And then months later, I tried, and I was told the case was thrown out of court, no reason given. And so sadly, that is basically what most women go through when it comes to rape. You get raped, but then you also continue being raped by the system as well. So it's been a tough journey. I went on a hunger strike 4 years back to get the Archbishop to actually listen to me. And because it's religion, and is within the patriarchy because it's ruled predominantly by men. It was tough. And so 4 years back, I ended my hunger strike with the Archbishop coming to see me and making certain promises, which he did not keep. And 4 years later, on the 1st of July, I went on another hunger strike, and this time outside his residence in Bishop's Court, because I needed him to know for the last 4 years how much I had suffered. And so that's what happened. He came out, and one thing that has come out of it, women clergy are now able to speak freely about abuse and patriarchy within the system, where they could not do before. The Saturday when he met me the second time, one priest had made a comment and said, for 5.5 years, they're trying to get the Archbishop to speak with them, and nothing. This Wednesday, there's a live Facebook feed where he's going to be addressing these issues with women, because it was women clergy who now called for it. So lots has happened, lots of pain and suffering, but I'm hopeful. I've got an advocate now who's prepared to take on my case pro bono, and I'm going to have the docket open once again.
Fantastic. All right, so there is some progress there. Wonderful to see. I'm going to take a few comments and then we're going to move to Anasia. Tariq Sumer said, first time offense or not, rape is torture of your mind, body, and soul. This whole world, governments and all are corrupt. Mushtaq says an estimated 1 out of 3 women globally will be beaten, raped, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. We must turn this around and we must do it now. Okay, Sadiq, I'm going to ask you to mute everyone except Anasia and I. Anasia, you recently came out about your experience of childhood abuse, which I really resonate with because I've experienced the same as well as gender-based violence. I'm incredibly proud of you. Can you share your experience of child abuse and how it affected your life?
Thank you, Shabnam. So, number one, as a comedian, to come out and say that you're in depression just took everybody by shock. I myself was really struggling with being inundated with people in my space, people touching me, people saying inappropriate things. And I really got to a point where I felt really unsafe about going out to events, and because people see you as a funny character, and then when you're off stage and you're no longer in character, they still feel that you're this fun, flamboyant, charming somebody that they can just have their way with or say anything they please. And it really regurgitated all of the trauma I'd experienced as a child. I experienced sexual abuse from before the age of 5. I put a stop to it at the age of 12. There were 4 perpetrators, 3 of which were just one-off cases. The one that really got me was a family member, and that started before I turned 5, and I put a stop to it at the age of 12. And it was empowering to take my power back and to say, stop, and you can't do this anymore. And I threatened to tell somebody, but I realized that it was keeping the secret that enabled the perpetrator to do what he did. It was the secret. So breaking the silence has been very empowering to me, and breaking the cycle. So I did everything within my power to make sure that my children didn't have the same experiences. So a lot of education, a lot of, and boys and girls, so my sons and my daughter. You know, I didn't for once think that this is something that just happens to girls. And the effect, now I feel empowered, but the effect of the shame, the guilt, the self-loathing. So on one hand, I have this urge, this need to stop him, to say something and stop him from doing this to other people. And then on the other hand, there is his wife and his children who I want to protect. I don't want his children growing up thinking their father's a monster. I don't want to put the family through it. So it was 2 raging bulls that was causing this havoc within me. And I finally decided that for once, I'm going to put myself first. And it was one of the most empowering things that I did, deciding to come out and speak about it, so that, you know, just even if it's a handful of children who watch this and have some education about it and don't have to experience it, that was enough for me.
Absolutely agree. Anasia, how many views have you had on that video that you did very recently?
I think it's close to 75,000 at the moment.
Brilliant. So the awareness is getting out there, and it's one of our tools to be able to use our skills and our networks on the ground and online. Rosalind Woodley says, "Bravo, sis. Well done." We have very many people joining the show today, which is always wonderful to see. All right, next question for the next round. Dr. Tash Reddy, what are your thoughts on the justice system, which you are now stuck in? And reactions from the public. I mean, I saw some horrific, yes, there were comments of support, but I saw horrific comments stigmatizing you as a victim and raising questions about your ethics and your credibility. So let's talk about the justice system and stigma from the public.
Well, the court case has been going on for 3 years. At every single court case, I was ridiculed, I was broken down mentally, emotionally, physically. There's every need from the defendant's lawyers to make me paint me out to be mentally unstable, a gold digger. They even came up with the theory that I was obsessed with him and I wanted his attention, so I got myself admitted into hospital just so I could be close to him. I mean, the theories that they came up with was so ridiculous. And every single time in the 3 years that I came back from court or had to deal with it, I was completely and absolutely shattered. And like Anasia, being a public figure, you have to be strong all the time and you have to smile all the time and you have to be confident and you're giving strength to everybody else. And you're breaking down inside because there's nobody giving you any strength. And, you're breaking to a point that your soul is being crushed. And you feel like no one is believing what you're saying and you start to doubt yourself. What did I do to cause this? What did I do to how did I contribute to this? And um, it really was a battle where, like Anasia, I started. The more people I surrounded myself with, the angrier I got, and so I went in a total opposite direction, and I started to isolate myself. I cut everyone out of my life. I literally started to isolate myself and not do anything with anyone aside from my kids and my husband and my mom. So it had a devastating effect and impact on me. Um, trying to be the strength and the courage that everyone needed me to be, and then try to build myself up. And then when I decided that as a result of more rape cases in hospital by other victims who had come to me to me for help, when I decided to take the institution up, it got a million times worse because I remember, when it went into the media, the last thing I expected to get negativity, but not on the level that I did. And you read Shabnam. The comments were ridiculous. They called me every name you could call a person, and women were calling me this, not just men. Women were calling me this. Um, I was told that I was going straight to hell, that I was called every name under, there is to call a woman. My morals, values, integrity was questioned. I was told that I was in it for the money. Someone sent me a message saying that I was going straight to hell, that because of me, the hospital would be closed and so many people are going to lose their jobs. Um, it was I had so many guilt trips put on me, and then I had to go through the process of speaking to social workers in terms of sentencing because he was found guilty 3 times already. He was found guilty. I mean, they questioned that guilty verdict 3 times, and 3 times the man was found guilty, and they're still questioning it. So that's why I have to go to court again on in July, next week. And one of the things is that one of the things the social worker, said to me was that they don't see how it impacted me because of how much negatively. They don't see how it impacted me negatively, and why he should suffer for it because I've achieved so much in the past 3 years since it happened. And if anything, in a sense, I should, in a sense, be thankful to him, because had he not done that to me, I would not have so viciously gone after the things that I went after and achieved.
So
I,
basically, you further victimized because you've achieved amazing accomplishments in your life. So you didn't suffer that much. So why should he have to suffer? Is what the justice
yes,
system is actually saying. Comment from Virishka Soma Min, that strength to you, your resilience will provide a foundation to many abused individuals. Deshni Govinda says, well done. Cyril Talani, great conversation. Shabnam Palesa Mohamed, of course, an ally in the fight against gender-based violence. All right, let's swap now. We'll move from Dr. Tash Reddy to Reverend June Dolley-Major. What are your thoughts on gender-based violence in religious institutions? It's a hot topic, not just in the church, right? But what are your thoughts on what's happening in religious institutions for centuries? And what's the role of activism, Reverend June?
Well, yeah, it is a very hot topic, and sadly, for many years, for decades, and I'm speaking now from the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, but we see it in other mainline churches as well, that sex and sexual offences towards women and children in particular is very rife within the churches, and it gets covered up for decades by the hierarchy within the church. By me breaking the silence, as Anesia has just said, it's empowering, but as Dr. Tash just said, the attacks comes afterwards also. So it's been happening. Sodomy takes place, rape takes place. It's run by men. It's a men's club basically, and patriarchy is the talk of the town. So that's what it's all about. So it's not religion gets used to abuse the woman and the child, because at the end of the day, it's the man of the cloth, and whose word will they take it? A priest, a man called by God, ordained within the church, or a woman. So the women are too scared to speak out. They are just so frightened. And so, as we heard about the secret, you keep the secret. And they use that power over women to keep them quiet and to keep the
But
secret.
you've
So
managed to move mountains, though, Reverend June, from your hunger strikes to the activism that you've embarked on, to the support and solidarity you got from fellow activists in civil society, and to media stepping up and highlighting and spotlighting what's going on. This is massive. What's the role of activism in defeating gender-based violence?
yeah, but it didn't happen overnight. It's been 18 years I've been fighting, 18 years. And sadly, just as Dr. Tash had said, you get the victimization and you hear people, even women, saying, why did it take you so long? Yet I've been shouting for 18 years and my voice has been silenced. So it took me to do something as radical as a hunger strike in Bishop's Court, leafy suburb of Bishop's Court, outside the residence of the Archbishop of Southern Africa. He came out on day one. And when he came out on day one, I gave him my demands, which were very fair demands. But he was very patriarchal and was very clear that I must just follow the legal route, and that is all, and he will pray for me. And I need to go now. I was persistent, and then eventually on day 4, he came back out and he asked me the same questions. But he was under tremendous pressure by then. So he asked me the same question, what are my demands? I had said exactly the same. I need an internal investigation. I would want, wherever my perpetrator ministered, there are other victims, and he needs to address those issues and find safe spaces for those women to come and speak out, because they're too afraid. And they are victims, but they are too afraid to speak out, because look what happened when I spoke out. I ended up on the street. I ended up homeless. I ended up jobless. I ended up hungry. And you, the one. And because it's the church, and just as Dr. Tasha said, I'm also accused of wanting to be a gold digger, want to bankrupt the church. That again, the same argument that was used with you. There must be something mentally wrong with me. So, or you're just a troublemaker, you're seeking attention, you're revengeful. And so the abuse takes place even within the ranks of the hierarchy. And so I also get those messages and the phone calls that say, I'm an F, I'm a P, I'm a this and I'm a that. How can I take on the church? But not every woman can stand up to that. I was able to stand up, go on a hunger strike, and it's sad that it had to take drastic measures like a hunger strike to get the attention of the Archbishop of Southern Africa, who speaks out against patriarchy, who speaks out against gender-based violence, yet in practice, who points out corruption in government, yet within his own institution, there's corruption. Within his own institution, rapists and pedophiles continue to minister, and the victims are silenced. So it took a whole lot of me to stand up, and not every woman can do that. And so we get abused by the systems, by the institutions, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a church, whichever it is, we are just abused all over again. And so, yes, it took radical action on my part to actually be heard and to have other women's voices heard who has been silenced, who's left voiceless because you're just too afraid to speak out. And so the women, because I'm speaking from the church's perspective now, the female clergy are too afraid to speak out because your job is on the line if you speak out, like what happened to me. So your job is on the line, so you just become silent. Out of fear, you keep quiet because you need your job, you need the income. So you just become quiet. And that's why I say part of breaking, I've realized, not just breaking the silence, you have to break the fear first. And once you break the fear, then you can break the silence. But it comes at
Wise
a
words
huge cost.
indeed. It comes at a huge cost, but I'm just so happy to see people in solidarity with you on the ground and online, and of course media stepping up. So it was quite brilliant to see. Rosalind Woodley says to get a protection order is the worst thing ever. Women who are traumatized by the abuse go to court and get treated like criminals. Talking from my personal experience, service delivery and compassion regarding gender-based violence does not exist. Thank you for sharing that with us, Rosalind Woodley. Absolutely agree. We're still on question 2 with 3 minutes to half time. And I want to turn the mic over to Anasia Govender now. Anasia, I want to get more into this freedom, the sense of freedom that you found from speaking out against the trauma. And as the days go, and you become more involved in engaging with people about your experience and speaking out, how this is affecting your life? Are you finding a sense of liberation? Is it getting any easier having spoken out?
So it is getting easier, but it was quite a challenge to get to this point. As Reverend Major said, it was basically having to go face the fear, and not just face it, but actually go through the fear. And I'm fortunate that I have a really strong support structure. I'm very fortunate that I have such a strong family bond and so much of support from my family, who were very patient, because the depression was really bad. I was really suicidal, like just constantly thinking death. And then and just that feeling of absolute worthlessness, of being you just, unfortunately, when something like this happens, and because there's such a ugly stigma around it, you kind of absorb these stigmas and these belief systems, however negative they are, and attach them to yourself, and you attach your self-worth to that. And my self-worth had gone way below zero. I was miserable. I was depressed. I was angry that it had to happen. Just that constant questioning of why me and why so many people. And then I started looking. I started looking at what it is I can do. And so I have this voice and I'm able to speak. I sing. I'm a public figure. I have people who will listen to me. And that's where the drive came then, to push through the fear and speak out and break the silence. So it came from having a lot of support and having lots of people direct me to my positive attributes, because the mind is a funny thing when it's stuck in the past and the mistakes that you've made. We tend to torture ourselves. We are our own worst critics. So I found myself just berating myself, hating myself, judging myself, criticizing myself. So unlike Dr. Tash, who had it from public, most of mine just came from within me. I was just judging and criticizing myself as as if society was doing it, but it was me. I was giving myself the hard time, and I had to push through my own self-loathing to finally see that, hey, you can't live in the past forever, and you have to come now. My life right now, I'm not being attacked right now because I came off social media. I barely did any functions in the past 2 years. I've really cut down a lot. I didn't want to be in the public eye. And when I was no longer in the public eye and I started to feel safe, that's when I got the courage then now to come up. And and it's not a naming and blaming and shaming game. It was just to come out and say that although you see me all hunky-dory, laughing, smiling, singing, making you laugh, that life has been really ugly and I've been depressed and I've been down and this is the reason. And I'm not the only one that has had this happen to. But if I can pick myself up, then you can pick yourself up. And if I can speak out, then you can speak out. And if I can find the courage to take, not just to speak out and tell people, but to take it to social media and tell people, hey, world, life is not perfect. What you see on Facebook is not perfection. That's not the perfect life. There's a whole reality behind that that screen on your phone. There's a whole reality that people don't know about. And just it took a lot of courage. It took a lot of courage. It was either that or death. And I thought about my children. I thought about my husband, my mom, and my sisters who really didn't have to endure any more pain, because my pain was not just my pain. It was my whole family's pain. My whole family have been through this ugliness with me and
And
standing
that's
by my
exactly
side.
what happens. I want to read a comment here from Irene Mantri. She says, so proud of you, Anazia. Pragashni Priya Govender says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And of course, we know who said that. And she says, keep speaking, sisters. You are powerful beyond measure. From a social activist, union leader, survivor of domestic violence, revolutionary, and teacher. Pragashni, of course, also published in Womandla. And I remember when Womandla launched last year, Sheena and I both had spoken. Anazia, you were also a very powerful part of the program. And afterwards, you and I had a discussion, and you said to me, I've experienced childhood abuse. I'm not ready to speak about it then. And I said, Anazia, when you are ready, you will know when the time is right. For me, the time arrived in 2010, and my life has been transformed, because there certainly is a freedom that comes with speaking out against gender-based violence. All right. We're a little bit ahead of the time that we had actually set out, but I want to move to question 3, which is how can we overcome gender-based violence and child abuse in a country where every day we're traumatized by the experiences of people around us, as well as the stories that we see in the media, and that's only the ones we see in the media, right? So let's start with Dr. Tash Reddy. Sadiq, you can unmute her. How can we overcome gender-based violence, Tash? Give us about a minute or so of your thoughts. How can we overcome this pandemic?
I was listening to Anazia and Rev June, and I was just, Anazia said she thought, why me? And I think from the time I lost my husband when I was very young, the one question I always had was, why me? And I remember my doctor telling me, why not you? And I think that question always made me take every situation that I encountered in my life and say, why not you? There must be purpose in this pain, and there must be power in this pain. And it made me forge through it. It made me find that purpose and get through. So yes, I endured so much criticism, so much. I mean, especially from family. And Asia is very lucky; she had a strong support system. I had a lot of people saying, "Why did you go public with this? Do you know what it's going to do to our family, our reputation, our what are people going to think of our family, and all of those things. How can you do this to your children? How can you do this to your husband?" My husband walked around with guys telling him they gave me a new name that I told you about, and it's a horrible thing. But every time I hear those things, it just gives me more motivation to fight. And I think for everybody, when you are wrong, we need to value ourselves to the point that we know we are this valuable. Someone said to me, why are you suing the hospital for so much money? Why do you think your, sorry, in inverted commas, your vagina is worth 50 million rand? It is worth 50 million rand. In fact, it's worth more than that. It's mine. It's mine. It's worth a hell of a lot. So I'm allowed to. And we need to teach the women out there that they have value. Why do they undervalue themselves? Why are we supposed to give ourselves no importance, no value, no anything? We're just supposed to go along and fit in this mold of who they tell us to be. So you're supposed to be a victim. This is what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be high on drugs. You're supposed to be promiscuous. You're supposed to be living your life in complete shatters. Don't you dare, as a victim, try and achieve anything, because that's not what victims are. That is what we're being told.
That's
That
not,
is
yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
wrong. And that is why so many women, so many children are afraid to speak up, because we are forcing them to fit into a mold that does not serve them at all. And we need
And I
to
just
know
want
we're
to add
so
to that,
valuable.
Tash,
We are
but
we are
part of your plans in suing the institution is to build rape crisis centers. So who is anybody else to tell you how much
yes,
or
yes.
how little that money actually is? So Deshni Govender says they will find all the excuses when in actual fact they have deep psychological issues. Rashida Khan says, I can't imagine what victims go through. Strength to you and much love and light on your path to healing and forgiveness. Cyril Palani of critical importance is the support structure from within the family. We have to conscientize society and also make sure that victims don't self-stigmatize thinking that it's their fault. More needs to be done in this area. And he speaks about a grandmother and granddaughter who were raped. So the grandmother was also stabbed and killed. And Sunny Morgan says, for once I'm stumped. I honestly don't have an answer to question 3. I am overwhelmed. But let's turn the mic over to Reverend June. We're on 7:37 already, Reverend June. I'll give you and Anasia a minute each. And I know it's not nearly enough time, but we need to get to solutions, which is where Sheena is also going to come in. What are your thoughts on how we can overcome gender-based violence in our country, Reverend June?
We need to change the narrative for number one. And women, we internalize what is done to us. We internalize what is being said to us. But we also need to realize to change, it needs to start on grassroots level, and we need to start at the police stations. Because when you report the rape, they come and they'll tell you it's a first time offender, it's not going to get to the courts. So we need to really, on principle, the act is wonderful that protects us women and children. But in practice, it does not happen. So we need to bring about a change at police level. When it goes there, make sure they are equipped, they are qualified to deal with rape. We then also need to then take it as far as the judiciary, because there we are once again victimized in courts. We go through secondary rape. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like secondary rape. It feels like rape all over again. So we have to change systems on grassroots level. And then also us as a community, the name shaming, the victim blaming, the body shaming, always making the victim feel that she is the one to blame. And we need to stop that. And at the end of the day, they don't point fingers at the rapist. They say, but what were you doing? What were you wearing? What did you do to initiate that? So we need to change our mindset. And that's why so many cases do not get reported. We need to speak out. We need to break the silence, whether it's on social media, everywhere, because there's a stigma attached that if you've been raped, you are dirty. So you keep quiet to protect the family or the institution. So we need to break that cycle. We need to talk about it. We need to say it's okay. It's not our shame. It's the shame of the perpetrator and those who cover up for them. And we need to assist. There are so many NPOs. I've got one myself, but we need to assist for funding because safe houses are so few. But we talk against gender-based violence and rape, but we're not willing to assist the places which reaches out. So that is one major way that we can assist.
Absolutely agree. Some good practical suggestions there from Reverend June Major. And I'm very sure that the people who we are speaking about are listening to the show today and they need to take cognizance of what we're saying. But let's turn the mic over to Anasia Govender now. Anasia, how can we overcome child abuse when every day we're traumatized by the stories, only the ones that we hear about? How can we overcome child abuse?
My profession is such that I can't really speak much on in terms of the law and the church, but I can say that as a parent, teaching my children human values, teaching them to be compassionate, teaching them, number one, to speak the truth, to do what's right, to be kind, to be loving, to be compassionate. And this is what's seriously lacking. Parents are rushing to educate their children so that they get a fine job and have a fine life. But human values, the things that make us human, Because I mean, for Dr. Reddy to have received so much of negativity from public just goes to show a lack of compassion and empathy from people. And I have to say that is our dire need at the moment for parents and elders at large to go back and teach their children important human values. That's the foundation for life. And if children understand to care for others instead of ridiculing them, to listen, to be attentive to how other children feel, if they learn to treat children properly, then they will grow into adults that learn how to treat people properly. So I would say, number one, instill values in your children and abide by these values, because your children learn from what you do far more than from what you tell them to do.
Absolutely powerful. Teaching children empathy, kindness, and courage in the home, in our schools, and our communities. So important. Thank you for sharing that with us, Anasia. So I'm going to turn the mic over now to Sheena St. Clair Jonker. We're going to talk about alternative ways, philosophies, strategies, and tools of dealing with gender-based violence and child abuse in our country, where our courts are overburdened and nothing works. We know this. We've been talking about the same thing, expecting a different result, and we need to change the way we think about it. And I'm hoping after about 10 minutes with Sheena, we'll have time for Tash, June, and Anasia to comment on what Sheena is saying and whether you think it can actually work. So let's start here, Sheena. What is restorative justice, mediation, and ADR, and how does that compare to litigation and the courts? You need to unmute your mic, Sheena.
Shabnam, obviously this is a massive topic. So we've got to be very careful how we present it in 10 minutes. First of all, I want to just as a backdrop to this say that we must understand patriarchy properly. It's a system. It's a system that has distorted the sacred masculine in as much as it has allowed for the oppression and brutalization of the sacred feminine. And I believe we need to start having conversations about how we raise little boys, the brutal ways that we raise little boys, the humiliating and violent initiation that's still prevalent in our schools, especially our elite schools. So there are all these kind of conversations to have. As another backdrop, I want to say that I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. And as a practicing attorney at the time, with every resource at my disposal, with with a very, very supportive family, it took me 3.5 years to get myself and my daughter out. So I understand the complexities of domestic violence. By the way, my daughter didn't really effectively exit until a few years later, when she decided not to have any further contact with the person involved. But so I'm both trained in this, and I've experienced some of it, and I understand violence in the home and violence in personal relationships to be a lot more complex than just arrest the guy and send him to prison. Do this, do A, B, C, and D. It's not as easy as that. The next thing is that criminal justice is not the best place for these kind of matters, because what you're doing is you're putting a victim at the center of a competitive system. The adversarial system is a competitive system. It's one party has to bring evidence against another party, and in competition with each other, that evidence is tested. And in this way, victims, I think it was Dr. Reddy spoke about in her court case being broken down mentally, emotionally, and physically. That's what happens to victims in the system. Add to that the fact that 99 out of 100 matters that proceed in court in rape cases or sexual violence cases do not result in convictions. That means there's 1 in 100 chance. If you factor in possibly 1 in 9 of these matters are reported, internationally, you have about 6 out of 1,000 people accused of rape actually being convicted and serving time in prison. And by the way, that's the Western adversarial system functioning as it's designed to function. It's not a good place for sexual violence, and it's not a good place for domestic violence. So what is the alternative? Restorative justice is an alternative. It's not perfect. Perfect would be that this stuff didn't happen, that we lived in a just world. But restorative justice gets us a little bit further down the road, in the sense that because it's an alternative space, we don't have to clinically filter facts through these artificial rules of evidence before we can decide what we're dealing with. If a victim consults me and we decide that it's a good alternative to set up a restorative justice process, and we reach out properly to the other person, and they agree, then we center the victim in that process. It's for his or her protection. It's to discuss agreed methods for their protection, which can result in cessation of contact with the person, even if it's a parent, cessation of parental rights in some matters. In criminal justice, if you have 99 out of 100 acquittals, what you find is victims of rape and victims of abuse continuing to share spaces with their abusers. My number one priority is to take the victim out of the situation by agreement, to help him or her exit the situation. The other thing is that criminal justice starts with the question to the victim, how can we possibly believe you? And then the defense attorney goes about, or the defense advocate goes about, strategically dismantling the credibility of that victim, taking the rules to the precipice of what's ethical and what's lawful, but still within. Okay, and we see what happens to victims, and it's a violent system. And as restorative justice practitioners, we don't want to answer violence with violence. We don't want to regulate violence. We want to take violence out of circulation. That's what we want to do. How do we take violence out of circulation? You don't reform a damaging system. You replace it. And restorative justice is a good thing to replace it with. So the kind of practical measures that that can emerge from a discourse in a restorative justice process is reparations, which is compensation, no contact orders, sometimes lifelong no contact orders, enrollments onto the sexual violence register, making sure that someone has nothing to do with women and children in a voluntary position or a professional position by agreement. We can get to accountability in far more practical ways than criminal justice. In criminal justice, if you're going to have 99% acquittals, you're going to have emboldening of this type of behavior, which is what we see. Even if someone does serve time in prison, the rates of recidivism after being through the criminal justice system are high.
Just on that point, Sheena, as part of the process, we can actually ensure that the perpetrator agrees to behavior therapy, correct? Which is totally different from what would happen to them in prison, where nothing would change.
Also, by the way, restorative justice process is not, it's not a foregone conclusion that the person's not going to serve time in prison. Sometimes we assist in a plea bargaining process. If prosecution has already begun, I will often recommend that there's a guilty plea and some form of imprisonment, but to save the victim from having to testify and be brutalized again within the system. Even if we have victims like children, some of my clients are as young as 7 that are telling me the most humiliating content. Now, we do have a system in our courts where they're speaking via an intermediary in camera. But then that's all destroyed and dismantled because they've walked past the abuser in the passage, or they've sat next to the abuser on a bench outside. There isn't this kind of holistic, comprehensive accommodation for victims of sexual violence in our courts. And we can't possibly continue to have victims of sexual violence and domestic violence at the center of an adversarial system. We can't continue to have that. It's got to change, and we've got to have better conversations about this in society. We're not trying to dismantle men. We need to dismantle the system that unduly benefits men, but also twists their sacred humanity. Do you know what I'm saying?
Agreed. Sheena, you've listened to the stories of Dr. Tash, Rev June, as well as Anasia. How do you think we could apply restorative justice, mediation, ADR to their situations if they were willing, in a way that is healing and constructive, healing for them and constructive for society?
Okay, so the first thing, and I wanted to say this at the beginning, I'm deeply saddened to be sitting in a situation where I'm listening to the stories of 3 women in these situations. We shouldn't be listening to stories like that. And I remain inconsolable in listening to this. And in that inconsolability, I remain committed to assisting where I can. Now, a restorative justice process would start with a consultation with the victim and just to understand the circumstances and understand who the other person is, and then to invite them into a process juxtaposing what they're going through and what they could be going through for the next number of years. Restorative justice is always a much better process for everyone. I don't put victims and offenders around the same table together in these matters, by the way, just in case it's not like I'm sitting there negotiating between a victim and an abuser. No, not at all. And restorative justice is often very misunderstood as being perpetrator-centric, and often it's practiced for the perpetrator and victim-offender dialogue. But my practice of restorative justice is specifically victim-centric, bringing the victim to the center. It's for the victim. There might be healing for the perpetrator, because in restorative justice, we believe that people offend for one of two reasons: sickness of the soul or lack of knowledge. The one needs healing, the other needs teaching. Now, while the perpetrator is getting his healing or teaching, or her healing or teaching, whatever it might be, we set up practical mechanisms for the protection of the victim, be that no contact orders, therapeutic interventions, sometimes incarceration, if it is within the criminal justice system. But the whole thing is to take the victim out of the violent process. So they can contact me and we can talk it through. Tracy Lomax and myself started Phoenix Rising last year, which was a specific intervention to bring civil damages claims in rape cases. So in Tracy's words, I'm not going to swear, she can do the swearing for me, but she took to social media and said, let's sue these effers. And she said, Sheena, can we use access to justice? I was like, of course. So this is, our law recognizes that where an injury is done to someone, then one of the remedies is compensation. And it's a very difficult conversation to have with victims. I recently negotiated quite a high settlement for a young victim of sexual violence. And I had to motivate it to her that she deserved this money because of a 5-year chasm in her studies between matric and the age of 23, where there was something specific that she wanted to study and follow a profession, which she never did because of this incident. And she now, it took a lot of convincing that her rapist, but working with her psychologist and me, she gained a different perspective about it. There's no money in the world that can make up for something like that. There just is not enough money in the world. But compensation can help fix certain aspects of victims' lives, specifically
And of course,
where there's
be able to pay for things like therapy, because that stuff's expensive,
therapy,
right? We've got a couple of minutes more to go, Sheena, and I want to hear what our guests have to say. But a quick comment from Des Governor: everything stems from patriarchy. Here's a man who's saying it. Let's readdress it in our homes, in our cultures, and in society. Attitudes need to shift. The dialogue is happening, and we must not let it be diluted. Okay, we've got 3 minutes. So I'm going to give a minute each to Tash, June, and Anasia. Your thoughts on what Sheena is explaining to us in terms of restorative justice, mediation, and alternative dispute resolution where behavior changes and the victim is not re-traumatized. Do you think this can reduce gender-based violence and child abuse? Let's start with Dr. Tash. We can unmute her mic.
Sorry, thank you, Sheena. While you were talking, there were so many things. You brought back so many memories. One of those things was that in court, outside court, had to sit with my rapist and half his church. And, I had them call me Bathsheba and Delilah and call me the devil and read out Bible scriptures to me and, call me every name. And it was just ongoing all the time. In court, they would make jeers and gosh, every possible way they could get to me emotionally and psychologically, they did. Unfortunately, and it did affect me. As much as you think you're stronger than that, it does affect you. And that's one of the things I was thinking about, that nobody really, until I heard you speak about it now, thinks about the effects of that between the rapist and the victim. Nobody thinks of having to face them, the victim having to face them constantly during the battle of taking them on. And so yes, it is something that I believe. I believe in what you're doing, and I mean in any way that we can make it easier for the victim, because I know the trauma that I'm still going through. I sent through a question where next week the defense lawyer wants to put me on the stand again and question me in terms of the sentencing, and I cannot understand that. Why does he want to question me when they have to establish sentencing? I still cannot understand that.
Absolutely agree with you, Tash. We're going to have to leave it there so we can give a minute
Yes.
each to Reverend June and Anasia. Reverend June, do you think what the philosophy, approach, strategy, and tools that Sheena is talking about can help reduce gender-based violence in our country?
Well, I'm all for restorative justice. The only concern that I do have, I've been involved with victim offender dialogues and it was always perpetrator centered. And Sheena said it, that this would be victim centered, and I hope so. And I just hope that there's follow up, who holds them accountable, who makes sure that these perpetrators are getting the help they need psychologically to move forward. We know that on paper, whether it's a protection order or a no contact order, is it being seen through? Because a piece of paper really doesn't mean anything to the victim because they still come after you. So who holds them accountable? So those are the questions, like who's going to work alongside the perpetrator to effect change? Because that is what we need, a change,
Good point. Sadiq just told me we've run out of time. I'm going to ask for Anasia, just for a minute, Anasia, do you think what Sheena is talking about can help reduce child abuse in our country?
Absolutely, it can help. It takes many hands to make this work. And I believe that people need to understand that these perpetrators, that it's not a sickness, it's like an addiction. Like there is help for people with drug abuse, like there is help for people who have cancer, which is a disease. There should be help. There should be more people trained to handle these perpetrators, to counsel them, to correct them. They need correction. They don't need punishment.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much. We've run out of time, but an absolutely powerful show. Thank you to our guests, Dr. Tash Reddy, Rev June Major, Anasia Govender, and Sheena St. Clair Jonker. We'll continue the conversation on our chat and look forward to more interventions on gender-based violence that actually make a difference. Thank you to our guests, our listeners, our viewers, and the Salaamedia team. Revolutionary peace. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.